I've received a couple of comments and requests for a video on how I sharpen and keep my knife sharp by people who it sounds like are having some difficulty in sharpening, which I can definitely vouch for is a very important aspect for chip carving. Going to have a lot of problems getting clean cuts and with grain and chips tearing out and everything if you have a dull knife. So definitely a good thing to be prioritizing and working on to make sure you can sharpen your knives. There's obviously tons of videos out there on YouTube for how different people do it. So I'm just going to talk about what I do, what works for me. I'm sure there's lots of things that work for different people as well. So these are the pretty much the only tools I use for sharpening. I've got some relatively coarse diamond stones, fine multi-grit corundum stone, and then my strop. I rarely use these. I pretty much don't use these on my chip carving knives, the diamond stones. I got just the smaller ones because I don't use them that much, and if I do need them for a chip carving knife, the blade is small. You really don't need all this surface area for a chip carving blade. But this is pretty much if the edge gets damaged, or somehow it were to get really dull or whatever. So this knife actually, it's a bit of a steeper angle here than most other knives because the tip got broken off at one point, and so I did use these coarse grits to kind of smooth that and round that back down, taking off a lot of metal at a time. So if you have a really dull knife that's having a hard time cutting, then this is probably someplace that you need to start with these coarse grits. And I will say they're labeled coarse, fine, extra fine, and to give you an idea, those are 325 grit, 600 grit, and then 1200 grit are the three here. So this one, the green is the finest, and that's 1200 grit, which is good for typical pocket knife or maybe a kitchen knife or something, but nowhere near sharp enough for what we're looking for chip carving. So then these are the two that I use on a more regular basis. And even still, I don't use the sharpening stone very often. Typically, I don't know, maybe like twice a year or something, I'll go to the sharpening stone. And this is nothing special. Like I said, just corundum. I think it was like $20 on Amazon a few years ago. Lasts a while. And this has the 2 grits, 3,000 grit. So again, compared to the 12,000, or the 1,200 rather, 3,000 grit, and then 8,000. And it comes with this little rubber foot that I find to be useful for preventing it from slipping on the desk when I'm sharpening. And for using it, it's pretty simple. This one I soak in water for about 25 minutes to make sure that all of the air pockets are filled and it's nice and full of water. And then really the only key thing is to make sure that you find the right angle to match the bevel on the knife. People talk about kind of the width of a dime back there, or 10 degrees, and really I think it just takes some practice getting a feel for, you can kind of feel it's flat down there now, and then you lift up a little bit, and it's pretty tough to actually, I think, feel the bevel, so you kind of have to just go by what you know to be right. And one thing that I found is a good way to make sure you're having the right angle is to take a Sharpie and just on the secondary bevel here at the end of the blade, you just draw with a Sharpie right along that and cover the whole bevel for the angle. Do that on both sides. And now that is what you want to basically file off. When you sharpen, you're removing metal. There's no way to make a knife sharper except by taking away the part of the blade that's not sharp. So when it gets kind of rounded like this, you need to cut off this part until it flattens out like that. And so that's what we're doing with sharpening. And so if you put black on the edge and then you run along your sharpening stone or even strop, and then kind of just after one or maybe two passes you can look and see, and you should ideally see no more black. If you see black on the edge, then that means you have it laid down too flat. You need to pick it up a little bit more. You're not actually contacting the edge on the stone. If you have black, if the edge is clean, but then you have black further up the blade, then that means you need to lay it down more close to flat. You're up too steep, you're getting the edge, but what that's going to do if you keep sharpening that way is you got a nice fine point like that, you're going to start opening it up and making it a wider angle. So the edge can still be keen, it can still be nice and straight and smooth, but that wider angle is going to act more like a wedge. Instead of slicing cleanly through, it's going to kind of start pushing and prying the wood apart the wider that angle gets. So you want to make sure you keep the same angle that your blade came with. And so yeah, once you get it kind of practiced for that, then if you have a dull knife, then what you might want to do is go, and this is the true on any of the sharpening things. You have a dull knife and you're maybe starting here, then you do enough strokes in the same direction, just pushing this way until you get a bit of a burr. Kind of some of the metal will like roll up and form a bit of a wire along the back, and you can feel it if you run your fingernail that way. So once you do that, then you can flip the knife over and just do the same thing going backwards. One easy technique to remember is go 10 strokes this way and then go 10 strokes this way. And then you can go 9 strokes that way and 9 strokes that way. That way you're keeping the two sides even, and you know you're going to be doing enough strokes to make it sharp, to do what this grit that you're working on is supposed to do. And again, paying attention to, if you're using the marker technique, making sure that you're getting rid of all of the black on the secondary bevel, which is all we are concerned about sharpening. So like I said, I don't use this very often. The strop is actually what I use. I try to remember to do it every like 20, maybe 30 minutes of carving time. It's not optional, I would say, for chip carving, that you definitely need to get a strop. And if you're not familiar, it's just a block of wood with a strip of leather on top. A lot of people make them themselves. You can buy them. And then you also put some of this compound on there. Some people call it honing compound or jeweler's rouge, but it's charged up with some metal particles in there which help facilitate the actual sharpening that the strop can do. Otherwise the leather is going to be kind of too weak. So again, that same 10 this way, 10 this way, 9 this way, 9 this way, all the way down to 1. Do that on the strop every 20 minutes of carving, ideally. I'd say no more than every 30. And that will keep your knife just about as sharp as it's going to get. Sometimes it's hard to remember to do that, or you're getting a groove, you don't feel like stopping to strop. So if that happens and it starts to get dull, then I guess I'd end up coming to the sharpening stone. You always want to make sure that you're working your way through the grits. So I can't just start at 8,000. I usually, if I do need to use this, I can start at 3,000, then 8,000, then the strop, and using all the same techniques, the same everything. It's just working on the finer grits each way. And same if you're starting on a coarser grit like this, work your way up through them. Try not to skip too big of a gap of grit numbers, otherwise it's just not going to work as well. Some people maybe don't consider stropping to be sharpening. I'm not exactly sure why. I think just vocabulary to separate using a stone versus a strop, but fundamentally sharpening is when you're removing metal from the blade to give it a finer edge, and that's what the strop does. As you use your knife cutting wood, you're dulling it. It gets less of a fine edge. You use the strop, puts it back into that perfect condition. It just removes so little metal that I think that's why some people don't think of it as sharpening, but really it is removing metal. You are making your knife sharper, and so, like I said, to me it's the same thing. It's just basically the finest grit of sharpening stone. You could think of it that way. And Um, yeah, I think those are kind of the two big takeaways are making sure that you're sharpening at the right angle, and also making sure that you're sharpening the whole blade and keeping the whole blade sharp. So you want to make sure you keep the whole blade on, whatever your sharpening surface is the whole way, and realizing that chip carving, you're usually only using, the last few millimeters or centimeter or so of the blade. So that's what's going to get dull. So you want to make sure if you're testing your blade for sharpness, you don't check on the back. Test on the tip, which is the most important part. And you might find that, yeah, the back is really sharp, but the front is getting kind of dull. If that's the case, you got to go back again through the grits, sharpen the entire blade until it's nice and even across the whole edge. And so find that right angle, make sure you're sharpening and keeping the whole edge sharp all the way through, and strop frequently to keep it sharp so you can avoid having to go back to the stones as often. It takes more time, wears away metal. I've got my first set of chip carving knives, I was struggling with that myself, and so I was constantly going back to sharpening stones and just wearing away metal, and now the blade is super thin. There's not much left of it, which is why I ended up replacing them by the time I was able to figure out how to keep them sharp. But these ones are several years old now, and they still look about like new as far as how much blade is left, because I just spend almost all the time sharpening on the strop, which, like I said, removes very little. You don't have to worry about wearing away your knife. I personally enjoy stropping and sharpening, so sometimes just to give me something to do and make sure that my knives are in peak condition, I'll actually listen to a podcast or watch videos or something while I strop for 20 minutes or whatever on a couple of knives. But probably not the thing most people like doing. You just want to get them sharp and get back to carving. So yeah, use these techniques, and let me know if you're